Hey everyone, welcome to Ancient Jesus Future Faith, Faith Uncensored, a time that you can ask questions, anything you want, nothing is censored. And yeah, so tonight is our first night on YouTube. We have been doing this for quite some time now on Twitch and decided recently to switch over to YouTube. So I think you'll find pretty much everything the same if you're joining us from Twitch. And please feel free. Any questions you have, throw them in the chat. You'll notice that Tana put in there a welcome. And one of the things we ask you to do is to put a Q and a colon. That makes it easier for me to search through the chat in order to find the questions that are there. Hey, Paul. And so the idea then is to go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We'll have some conversations tonight, and yeah, I'm pretty excited. It's a little strange. I'm actually a little, it's weird. I'm a little bit nervous about doing the live stream on YouTube when there's really nothing different than just doing it on Twitch. I think it's that comfort zone you get in because you know what to expect, you know what's going on and everything. And so I'm sure there's going to be some idiosyncrasies that exist with YouTube that I do not or had not dealt with Twitch. So it's good to see you, Paul. I hope you are well. Ray, how are you? I hope you're well. That's going to be the other thing. So people's usernames are going to be different on Twitch than they are on YouTube. And so thankfully, Paul and Ray, I got you all figured out. So that'll be good. Yeah. So I hope everyone's had a great week. One of the things we want to make sure that we do here is this is a time for people to be able to ask whatever they want about whatever they want. We just ask that you remain kind, generous, merciful, respectful in the chat. Beyond that, you're welcome to ask me whatever questions you have, and I will do the best I can to give you my honest opinion and ideas, and by no means should you take them as gospel. So let's see here. Just an FYI, there is a 10 to 15 second lag between when you put something in the chat and when Don sees it. That is true. And it works obviously the same direction. So, yes, there is it's more so the lag is from me to you. That when I read something, when I say something, it's going to take about 10 or 15 seconds until you hear it. So just give me a little bit. I'm going to be trying to make sure we do that well. But if I don't get to your question right away, my biggest concern with that delay, because I believe on Twitch it was just like 5 to 7 seconds. My biggest concern with the delay is that you might feel like a time has passed, too long has passed before you could do a follow-up question. Please don't be afraid of that. Throw your follow-up question in the chat. I want to make sure that we're hitting that. So if you haven't already, if you hit the like button for the feed, and even if you haven't subscribed, we'd appreciate that. By hitting the like button, it sends it out to the algorithm, so hopefully we can get a few more people on the conversation this evening. With that being said, go ahead and throw whatever questions you have in the chat, or we'll do the wheel of wisdom much earlier in this process than I had desired, because you all know how much I love that. Another nice week. So I'm struggling a little bit, guys, just so you know. I had the opportunity. It was a wonderful opportunity to do a destination wedding for some folks that I adore. But it was a very quick turnaround for me. And it was like 10 or 12 hour flights, both directions. It was beautiful where we were. I loved it, every moment of it. But it was a quick turnaround. So my sleep schedule is so off, and I'm feeling so disrupted. I figured I'd come back from the trip because I was only gone for 4 days. I figured I'd get back. It would take me a day. I was thinking Monday, which is why we didn't stream Monday. I was thinking it would take me a day to kind of get back in the swing of things. And here we are 4 days later, and I just still struggling. All right. Let's Ray Presidente. Reading the story of Jesus being handed over to Pilate by the Sadducees, can you clarify the difference between Sadducees and Pharisee? Absolutely. So it's very similar to, I shouldn't say similar, but the differences between a Sadducee and a Pharisee is they're both Jewish. They both hold a lot of the same concepts, ideas, and everything. Some of the major differences that existed was that the Pharisees believed that there would be a resurrection, that there would be a physical resurrection. They also believed that in all of the Hebrew Bible. So though it wasn't, I don't believe it was canonized by the time of Jesus, but a large portion of the Hebrew Bible was kind of set, right? And so they didn't just follow Torah; they followed the wisdom literature, the historical books, the prophets, the Psalms, Proverbs, etc. Whereas the Sadducees would have been Torah only. So they wouldn't have really used any of the other prophets or anything like that. So there were just some differences around that. For the most part, boy, someone listening that does this as a study would probably freak out about this a little bit. But there's really not a significant amount of differences beyond that. They were Torah observant. Both Sadducees and Pharisees were Torah observant. But for the most part, the Pharisees observed all of Scripture, all of the Hebrew Bible. They accepted the oral tradition, which, again, the Sadducees would not have. And they believed in a physical resurrection. And so that's one of the largest differences. Now, I will tell you, there's a great book that just came out by Amy Jill Levine and another person. I forget the other person's name, which is a shame. Actually called Pharisee. And it really walks you through who the Pharisees were. Because one thing that's important for us to recognize as Christians is that ancient Pharisees became modern day and even medieval rabbinic Judaism. So the rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that we have as part of our world today, actually is a product of Phariseeism. And so it's important. It's one of the areas where I think the church really does a disservice by using the word Pharisee kind of as a negative, right? People, if you're doing something bad, or you're doing something poorly, you're not doing something that people think honors God, they'll call you a Pharisee, or you'll call yourself a Pharisee. And that's just really unhelpful. We shouldn't do that because, like I said, so much of modern Judaism is indeed a direct descendant of Phariseeism. The other thing I would argue is that Jesus was closer related. I would make the case that Jesus was actually not just closely related, but was a member of the Pharisaic party. If Gamliel, who is the grandson of Hillel, was Paul's rabbi or Paul's teacher, Jesus and Hillel agree on 99% of the things that we see Jesus's teachings on. So the teachings we see of Jesus, we could trace to a Hillel mindset. And really the only one that is a major one that we see a difference on is Hillel says about divorce that if your spouse burns your toast, you can divorce them. Obviously, Jesus holds a much tighter perspective on that marriage relationship and does not allow or does not consider it healthy to divorce over something so simple. Jesus points out you can divorce over adultery, you can divorce over much larger things, but not necessarily over burnt toast. So that's the only place you can really point to on the surface that Jesus and Hillel disagree. And in a lot of ways, Hillel is the father of the Pharisaic movement. And so, anyhow, there you have it. So that would be the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Pharisees are, one quick thing, even though I didn't say it necessarily explicitly, is that with the Sadducees not believing in a resurrection, they believe there was no afterlife. Like we just died and that was it. We lived this life and then it was over. Which is why when Jesus argues with the Sadducees, Jesus will say things like, no, God is the God of the living. and then mention Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, implying that they're alive, right? Because he's talking to a Sadducee who does not believe that there is an afterlife. So it's kind of fascinating to read through the Gospels and hear the way Jesus argues or debates with the different religious leaders. And you can see a difference in the way he debates with Pharisees versus the way he debates with Sadducees. Very, very interesting stuff. So that being said, Ray, if you want any follow-up questions, throw it in the chat. Don't forget we're on a delay, so I might not see it for a few moments, or it might take a few moments. So with that, I'm going to turn over to see what Paul has to ask. Paul, how would you deal with Christian family that use their theology to justify dead naming, misgendering, trans family or friends? Oof. That's a wonderful question. And it's a sad question, in my opinion, that we have to ask that. It's a wonderful question that you thought to ask it. I've been thinking about dead naming quite a bit from a biblical perspective, because one of the things that I notice that I do is I'll talk about Sarah versus Sarai or Abram versus Abraham. And now I don't want to get it twisted that that's the same thing as dead naming. But if we refer to Sarah as Sarai sometimes, it's kind of like, well, no, that's not her name. Her name was changed, and therefore we should call her Sarah, or we should not refer to Abraham as Abram because Abraham's name was changed. We shouldn't talk about Paul as Saul because Paul's name was changed. So one of the things, if I had to use the Bible, because that would be a way that a Christian family would understand it, would be to recognize that God often affirmed, supported, and even encouraged the change of names of an individual in order to celebrate this new chapter of their life, this new excursion that they're on. And so God seems to have a mindset, a predilection even, to allow a new name to signify a new chapter in a person's life, a new moment in the way they view the world. And I think that that's significant. I think that that's important. So if I had to think of a way that I would use, I would talk about this, is that if they were using a theology to push back on the idea of someone being dead name or someone's name being changed, and then therefore demanding using their dead name, I think I would probably remind them that Saul went through a transition on the road to Damascus. Now, not the same transition that a trans individual would, but went through a transition on the road to Damascus that compelled a change of name to demarcate this moment as unique and significant. And I think I would do the same with Abraham and Sarah. So that's probably how I would begin that discussion. But Paul, I think this is a wonderful question. So I'm certain that you could probably find a follow-up question. Well, that they're probably going to say this to respond to that. And because of that, feel free to throw a follow-up question in the chat. I'd be happy to discuss that more. Yeah, and Simon to Peter, absolutely, Amanda. Yes, 100%. All right, let's see. RGG, what evidence do you have that God exists? I have none. I have no evidence. I have no observable evidence. RGG, I'm sorry. For me, that's part of the reason why it's faith, right? It's not certainty. It's not science. Faith implies in some way that I'm trusting in something that I can't observe completely. I can tell you that as someone who has been a person of faith for a long time, left faith, came back to faith, that one, I find the Bible compelling. when you study it in its cultural context, when you study it in its Second Temple Jewish setting, when you study it in its pre-Constantinian interpretations. I find it to be extraordinarily compelling. But I don't believe that I could sit here and reason God for someone, nor do I think that's actually makes sense to do. I think one of the mistakes that happens a lot with Christians is they love apologetics, right? I say they as if I'm not one, but I am a Christian. But apologetics is this idea of arguing for the belief in God or arguing the proof of God. And I just don't think that there's really a lot there. I think it's that people experience things that they can't explain. That's my personal experiences. I've experienced things in my life that I can't articulate, whether it be emotion, whether it be feeling, whether it be experience, just, what other people would consider to be normal experiences. I don't have an explanation for that feeling or that knowing that exists in me. And for me, I find the idea of God compelling. I don't expect other people to have that same feeling of being compelled by that. And I don't think it's necessary. I think that's where religion gets weird, is when it expects other people to match that emotional experience and therefore condemn people if they don't. And I just think that's ridiculous. In the same way, I think it can be absurd that people that are not of faith condemn folks who are people of faith. I just don't think that should be our role. All of us, psychologically, humanly, cling to things that go beyond observable reason to justify emotions, justify feelings, justify the way we view the world. And for me, it just so happens to be that I find the story of Jesus, I find the story of Israel compelling. Let's see. RG, thank you for all these questions. Wonderful. You can use faith to justify any belief, so why use faith? I don't disagree. You can. It's just that, again, this comes down to what's compelling, right? That we all have things that we find to be very compelling that we don't have a whole lot of facts to back up. People that don't believe in a God use similar mindsets and emotions, right? To determine whether or not it was a Big Bang or it was some other entity that created the universe out of nothing. And in no way am I condemning that or saying, and therefore you should believe in a God. No, I'm just saying that we all have things. None of us can really define a lot of emotions. The concept of love, the concept of deep, abiding care for someone. We can't necessarily articulate why we still love someone that harms us. We can't necessarily articulate why we are fond of certain things. And that's okay. I don't think we need to. I think that life, regardless of if there is something beyond this life, if there is an entity that exists, a God, a divine entity, or nothing, that if we're not causing harm to others, and now this is where I think it gets messy, RG, is that religion has caused harm. People of faith have caused harm, and we're seeing it in the U.S. right now, in my opinion, in the political realm. People voting their religious views into legislation is harmful and terrible and horrible, and I don't think it should happen. I think that the ability for each of us to hold to things that bring us hope, that bring us to the place where we want to demonstrate mercy and compassion and empathy to our neighbor, those are extraordinarily valuable things that I don't know that we need to be able to reason why I would give up some of the things that bring me safety and security and to redistribute those to other people. I don't think that I need to use reason to do that. I think I need to I'm kind of lost in my answer a little bit there, RGG, but feel free to do a follow-up question. I'm pretty certain that with your question and your follow-up thoughts and stuff, that this isn't going to be necessarily satisfying of an answer. So maybe you have something more you'd like to ask, and I'd be happy to address. If you have good reasons to believe something, you don't need faith. Yeah, but that's the thing, though, right? Is that faith and certainty aren't the same thing. I'm not concerned about having certainty about God. I would rather, I shouldn't say I would rather, but rather, since I can't have certainty in God, I trust that it is something. I would say that I have faith in my spouse to treat me well, because I can't ever possibly have certainty that that will be the case. But I have experience. I have emotional interactions. I have things that tell me in some way that my spouse is going to be kind and compassionate and loving to me. You can use faith to believe in Scientology, Mormonism, Islam, karma, reincarnation, etc. Faith is not a reliable pathway to truth. Yeah, maybe it isn't for you, and that's awesome. And I'm totally okay with that. For me, I would say that the deeper I embraced my faith, the more I was compelled to think about others, the more I was compelled to think about my neighbor. And maybe you are not as weak-minded as I am, and you were able to do that without the need of a faith in something greater. And I would say mine isn't compelled by the fear of hell or anything, because I don't believe in hell. And I actually am a universalist in that I believe that everyone has access to the world to come. And so, but I find these ideas of a God who desires justice and mercy and compassion compelling to me. And again, I always say, so I wear barefoot shoes, and you can read different science about whether barefoot shoes actually are beneficial or not. And I always say, when it comes to barefoot shoes, and I would say the same thing's true about religion for me, is that I don't care if it's a sugar pill. I don't care if me wearing barefoot shoes affects my weak-mindedness, and therefore my back feels better because I'm weak-minded. I'm okay with that. If I'm getting the effect of a sugar pill from wearing barefoot shoes, but I feel better as a human, and I feel physically healthier, then I'm okay with that. And so I feel very similar to faith, is that if there is no God, I've lived a very compassionate, merciful, justice-minded life. And if my life just ends and that's it, and there's nothing more, then it was still a good life. I understand why a lot of non-theists or anti-theists or atheists or whatever label are fundamentally opposed to religion, because they've seen the harm it's caused. I have trauma from religion early in my life. I grew up in a household where my father was a pastor, and my household was abusive. And I have trauma. Why did my trauma not turn me against religion? I don't know. I have no idea. But instead, I have found hope in my faith. And because of that, I've clung to it. I acknowledge my faith as a crutch. Otherwise, I would no longer be here. I need to believe in a purpose. Yeah. I think that, it's funny because people will be like, oh, religion's a crutch. Well, let's say it is. When I break my foot, they give me a crutch. Why? Because that's the way to get back to health. That's the way to be healed. That's the way to move on to something healthier and fullness of life. And so, can religion be a crutch? Absolutely. Is that a negative? Well, only if you're able-bodied, so to speak, and you're using the crutch in a manner that is actually debilitating you, limiting you. But that's not the point of a crutch. A point of a crutch is to give you purpose, to give you hope, kind of what Amanda was saying. Is it fine to admit that one doesn't know the origins? Of course it is. Yes, absolutely. To me, Man, I used to make myself so sick, RGG. When I was like 10, I've always been a question asker, and I laid in bed and I would ponder eternity, and I couldn't wrap my brain around eternity. And then that would get me so emotionally distraught trying to ponder eternity at the age of 10, I would turn my thinking to the past and start to think about how did all of these galaxies, all of these this universe, all of these solar systems, all of these systems of stars, how did it come out of nothing? Like if there was no other entity to create it, how did it come about? And then I would go, well, if there was an entity to create it, that only solves my problem for a moment, because then what created the entity that created it? And I would just get so overwhelmed by that, that mystery, that peculiarity, that strangeness. And yeah, I was taken to the hospital a couple times because I would get so sick that my body was responding and replicating. What's it called? My appendix bursting. My body responded in a way that it could have been my appendix, and so I would get taken to the hospital at 10 because I was pondering eternity and I was pondering where the universe came from. So, yes, I think it's completely okay. Just don't make yourself that sick. All right. Paul, do you incorporate practices of other religions aside from Christianity and Judaism in your personal faith practices? I would say not in a deliberate way, but there's a lot of things about meditation and Buddhism that I find extremely beautiful and valuable, and even different forms of practices of silence, etc. Though there is silence as part of the Christian faith. But let's be honest, if you're a Christian, actually, if you're just a Westerner who buys into a religion in general, you are actually, without knowing, taking other religions into your daily practices. The faith that we have today is steeped in outside religions, ideas and practices, right? Whether we're talking about, and I want to be careful here because there is a modern religion called paganism. But in the Bible and in ancient times, when you refer to paganism, it just meant every religion that was not Judaism, right? So every religion outside of Judaism was considered paganism. Whereas today there actually is a pagan religion. So what I would say is that, so I'm referring to the ancient concept of all these other religions. So I'm using the term pagan as a shortcut here. And maybe I need to rethink that and say it differently so I'm more clear. But the idea is that, if you look at Christmas, if you look at Easter, all of those are steeped in pagan practices and traditions. Whether it's the tree, whether it's the garland, whether it's the mistletoe, whether it's the Easter eggs, right? All of these things are pagan influence, non-Christian, non-Jewish religious influences on our faith. And so we all have that. And where we peel away those things and what is ultimately ancient Christian or ancient Judaism, I think we'd find it hard to find. But as far as, I'm going to assume that the heart of your question, Paul, is what practices outside of modern Christianity do I intentionally welcome into my expression of faith? Any that are meaningful. I think that we should all be open to other faith practices that allow us clarity, allow us to experience peace. I don't think we should be afraid of those things. I think that there's importance in recognizing that other cultures, other communities have spiritual practices and faith-filled practices that are valuable. It's why they've stuck around for so long. So I'd say for me, the biggest one, the largest one would probably be the idea of meditation and silence, that I first really kind of got introduced to through Buddhism, but I believe also has a history within Christendom. So, RGG, you don't need faith to trust your spouse. You have evidence based on their past behavior and their treatment towards you. It doesn't require absolute certainty to trust your spouse. Yeah, I agree. In fact, actually, RGG, to be fair, while I was saying that, I assumed this would be a pushback to that statement. But I think the part that's different for me than maybe for you is that I would say I have those same experiences that I apply to a God. That I've had experiences throughout my life that seem beyond me, that seem beyond humanity, that seems to be something connected with an other, a divine entity. Some people might call that one thing or another, but for me, I identify that as God. And so throughout my life, I have these different experiences where I feel a connectedness with something beyond me. And so that's part of how my faith is maintained in them. But yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that's a fair pushback on my example. Could you live that compassionate, merciful, and justice my life without believing in God? Absolutely. 100%. In fact, I think lots of people do. I don't think that faith or religion is necessary for people to be good. I have so many friends who are non-theists, anti-theists, are not interested in religion or have left religion. They're some of the most beautiful human beings I've ever met. So no, I don't believe it's necessary. And again, I think this is where we get into problems, right? Is that I think people who are religious are, especially people who are religious out of fear, they want to be set apart. They want to imagine that what they experience is so unique, or what they have access to is so unique that it makes it worthwhile. Because one of the things I've always found interesting, RGG, is that a lot of Christians, I don't think would remain a Christian if they knew for a fact there was no afterlife, because there's nothing valuable and meaningful about their faith and the way they practice their faith, except for to get out of hell. And that's a huge problem. For me, my faith, my experience in life and in this journey is that there's great value. In fact, one point, I was taking some medication because of a shoulder surgery I had. And one of the side effects was fear. And I went into this really dark place where I had lost any sense of God, right? And I was like, I no longer believe in God. And this lasted for 6 or 9 months, maybe almost a year. But one of the things I realized in the midst of that was that I would still follow and I would still do the practices that I had obtained through my faith, because my faith was meaningful. What I was doing and expressing to others, and the relationships I had built, and the conversations I had had, and the experiences were so beautiful and good that even if I did not believe that there was indeed a God, I wanted to stay connected to the Bible. I wanted to stay connected to a faith community. And I think, and I've seen that in a lot of my friends who have walked away from faith, is that one of the things they'll say that they miss the most is being connected to a faith community, being connected to a church and relationships. And I think for a lot of people, that is the significance of faith, is that community, because it's hard sometimes to find that community other place. I believe it's completely possible. I'm not saying that the church holds a certain grasp on that isn't available to others. But I think that is one of the pieces that makes faith compelling, is that built-in community and relationship. Knowing that you're all bent towards the same thing and striving for the same thing is really powerful. So, Amanda says, I'd argue many of my atheist friends do it better than many Christians do. Absolutely. I certainly agree. Here's the hard part, right? Is that if you grew up in the United States, you have not been able to avoid the influence of Judeo-Christian values. And I'm not saying that people who are non-theist or atheist are only good people because of that Judeo-Christian impact. But I'm saying that none of us, whether I walked away from faith or never became a person of faith or not, I could never say that I'm not my thoughts about God, my thoughts about a possibility of a God, my thoughts about the way to engage the world were never influenced at all by Judeo-Christian values. It just would be impossible because we all have had it impacted. Now I think it's probably becoming less and less because I think the world is smarter now and they aren't letting it infiltrate to the level that it was. And I think that's kind of what we see a lot of the GOP doing right now is trying to grab back that space, like try to claw back access to people and force them to experience ideals and morality. And I said earlier about legislating our morality, which I think is wrong and we shouldn't do. Let's see. How do you make the connection between your feelings and a divinity entity that you are connected to? I don't have a good answer for that. I just really don't. It was probably part of it's probably because I was raised in the church, and so those feelings were solved for me. I was just told that those are the divine. That when I would feel that emotional heightening, that someone would probably, when I was younger, probably would have said, "Oh, that's God," and that became a truism for me, and that became meaningful to me. Would be my guess. And yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add to that other than to just keep beating that horse. But I think that that's probably what it was, is that I was just raised to imagine that those things. And now I would argue as an adult, I feel that's true. And so whether that is psychological and not a reality, I don't know. It's the same way as they've done. So I'm really fascinated with brain plasticity. Like for some reason, it just really intrigues me. So I've read tons of books on how the brain works. And one of the things that is interesting is that people who pray, it lights up the same spot in their brain as if when they're having a conversation sitting across the table from someone. So when you're praying, a person of faith, they tend to pray in a way that it's as if they're just sitting across the street, sitting across the table, and there's a reality of presence there in the way they pray. Now you could call that just a psychological thing, which many of the doctors that have done these studies have said. But because of that response to the brain, it also is calming. It gives them peace. It soothes them because they're able to talk to this entity, imagined or not, as if they are present. And because of that, it can bring peace and hope and calmness in really complicated situations. And for many people, it has led to an increased well-being of health. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting things around faith and religion that has beauty and meaning. I think that we've done a really good job of fucking it up for so long that a lot of people don't see those positive entities or those positive pieces. But there is a lot of science that actually backs this idea that the belief in something greater than oneself, an entity, a divine entity that desires mercy and love and compassion and calls us to do that, actually has an overall positive impact on people's lives. The negative impact is when people in power utilize that to create fear and get people to behave in the way they want. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Because the people that tend to give themselves over to faith also tend to be susceptible to a leader who will manipulate that faith to get them to do their own bidding. And that's a dangerous thing. And we need to be very careful of. All right. Not sure if the Trinity knot is inspired by Celtic work, but it sure feels like it. Yeah, it definitely does. All right, let's see. RGG, I really appreciate all these questions. Thank you. You have acknowledged that you can live a good life without a belief in God. You have acknowledged that faith can be used to justify any belief. Why hold up faith on a pedestal as if it's a virtue? Because it is a virtue for me. It just is. So it's the same way that if you, RGG, are a non-theist or an anti-theist, that you have virtues that I wouldn't agree with, and that you'd have virtues that other non-theists wouldn't agree with, and because it's meaningful to you. And for me, I would say I find faith to be very virtuous, the way that I've come to understand it. And here's what I would argue, RGG, is a lot of my non-theist, anti-theist friends are grateful that I'm still a theist, because I'm probably the closest thing that they have seen of a person of faith to their own way of thinking. And because of that, they hold out hope that I might convince some other theists to think about things differently. And if that is my role in this world, is that in some way I influence the theists of the world to be more compassionate, more merciful, more grace-filled, more kind, more empathetic to all religions, to all non-religions, and live in harmony and celebrate the beauty of this world, well, that's a good thing, I think. Maybe you disagree. I don't know. It's interesting because the reality is that whether you are a fan of Socrates, or you're a fan of Stoicism, or you're a fan of Platonism, all of those are connected to gods. All of them. Almost every philosophy we have today comes from a theistic place, comes from a philosophy built out of a theology of how gods work. Socrates had a god. Aristotle had a god. Plato had a god, or multiple gods. And so almost all philosophies that we still hold today in our world are built from theistic philosophical roots. And maybe Christianity is just a late bloomer and eventually will die and become eventually like Stoicism, and not like I know so many people who love Stoicism right now. It's like super popular amongst young millennial tech people. They love Stoicism. They don't associate it with a god, but it came out of a philosophy that was connected to God, to a god. And because of that, I have to also say that none of us arrived at our philosophy without an influence of a theistic process to get here. And I just might be a late bloomer. It's the best I have. Thanks for answering our questions. I have to go at the moment. Would you ever be willing to take phone calls? Absolutely. RGG, we have a way for you to even call into the show if you wanted, but you can also find us on all social media platforms. So you are welcome to check us out, private message us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you name it, we're there somewhere. So 100%. I love these conversations and I think they're super important. So feel free to reach out anytime at all. Good to see you. Hey, yeah, Marcus, good to see you too. Yeah, we switched from Twitch to YouTube. I think I mentioned it right after you left the stream the other day. And I'm noticing now in the upper corner of my screen, it still has the Twitch handle, but Twitch wasn't able to handle or do some of the things that we needed it to be able to do. And we decided that before we became too big for our britches, because that's going to happen, obviously, we're going to become YouTube stars. Mr. Beast will have nothing on Faith Uncensored eventually. And So we decided it was probably wise to move now while we were still kind of getting our footing and everything. So, all right. Yes, all of my gaming career. Find your love in your city. I have a feeling that's an ad for something that is not attempting to actually find my love. I mean, maybe not Philo love, probably Eros love would be my guess based on the name. But yeah, so if you are looking for Eros love in your city, clearly 69girls.xyz has some intel for you. So there you go. I mean, you didn't realize the pure amount of depth of knowledge that you would receive logging into this live stream, did you? Real quick reminder before we jump into more questions is if you have not already, please like the stream and subscribe if you haven't already. So that way, if you hit the bell on the subscription, that will actually send you an email or a reminder when we're about to go live. I think it gives you a half-hour heads up. It'll also just notify you through your different apps. So you'll have a reminder when we're about to go live. The thumbs up and the liking of the live stream hits the algorithm for YouTube in such a way that it spreads it out. It sends us out to more people, so more people have access to the live stream. So please, I'd encourage you and be grateful to you if you did it. Thank you, whoever that was that just liked that. That was awesome. I totally felt like a televangelist there. Just thank you. Thank you for those. Oh, I felt one. I felt another. All right. What questions we got? I think Tana, am I correct that I got all of the questions out of the chat? If not, can you point me to where I might have missed one? Sarah, I don't see a thumbs up. It should be right below the video. I see that I see that. Yes, exactly, Marcus. Right below you, there should be a thumbs up right below this, right below the video feed. But if not, that's okay, Sarah. It's all right. We will survive without the thumbs up. All right, what other questions do we have tonight? What are we thinking about? Anything particular? Marcus, did you do your discussion on, you see scissors? Oh, for cutting it. There might be like a 3 dots or something that, excuse me. All right. I don't know where I was going. All right. If anyone has a question, throw it in the chat. Oh, I know what I was going to ask. Marcus, did you do your teaching on the woman at the well? And if so, what were a couple of your takeaways that you came to as you were processing this, thinking about it, and sharing it with folks? Or is it recorded? Hey, I saw another like, another thumbs up. Sarah, I don't know if that was you or not, but you will get tenfold of thumbs up on your next video if it was you. All right. Maybe it was maybe the Love in My City thumbed up our video. Still deep in it, but I got some pretty awesome stuff. Preaching on November 13th. Nice. Okay. All right. Well, I hope that goes well, and you experience an amazing opportunity. Sarah, not you, too much credit. Well, maybe it was done on your behalf. It was a intercessory thumbs up is what it was. We'll go with that. It was It was a thumbs up on your behalf, Sarah. I started a new series on YouTube that is, I think we named it kind of confusingly initially, and we renamed it because it's Genesis in 50 minutes or less. And I'm going to do a 1-minute short for each chapter in Genesis. And since there's 50 chapters in Genesis, it's going to be 50 minutes or less. So I'd encourage you to check those out. Give me some feedback and thoughts. But what I'm hoping to do is do that throughout all of Torah. So that way you could sit down in about an hour, listen through an entire book of Torah and hear kind of like what each chapter is about, the progress of the story, etc. And maybe even help you to remember where different things are in the text. All right, fifth Sunday. I hang out in a lot of places with people who are non-theists. They often come to me because I'm one of the few people they know who have a faith and am willing to discuss it. I often feel that I'm incapable of addressing their issues to my satisfaction, but I'd still like to have the conversation with them. Should I redirect them or power through it? I don't think you need to redirect them. They came to you because they value you, right? Because you're someone that they trust is going to be honest. There's someone that they trust. The 200 character limit's going to be a problem. That's awesome. But no, I'd say, I wouldn't even say like, I just encourage you that it's not even, I mean, power through it might be the way you think of it. And I don't want to dismiss that that's the way you're thinking of it, but just remember, they trust you. They find you to be someone that they admire, they look up to. And I'm not even talking about necessarily in faith, but they know that you're going to have integrity in the way you respond. And fifth Sunday, I have no idea how long you've been on this live feed, but my conversation with RGG, I basically said, I don't know a lot. And that's completely reasonable. In fact, I would argue that's some of the best answers we can give people is to say, I don't have a good reason to believe this stuff other than it feels true to me. And I'm comfortable with that. Right now, the only person uncomfortable with that is the person asking me why I believe it. And the truth is, we all believe things about life, about others, that could be true or could be false. And because of that, I think it just comes down to being willing to say, I don't know. That's a great question. And here's what I feel, and here's what I believe, but not necessarily here's what I think is true for everyone. And I believe that you probably do that extraordinarily well, knowing you are a kind and generous and loving human being. And so I imagine you just do that exceptionally. Recently in 2020, a woman at Brandeis University recently did a research study in which she looked at a bunch of ancient synagogue inscriptions and found that there's some evidence to suggest there were female priestesses in Samaria at the time. Not only that, but we know that Assyrians who had intermarried with the Israelites to create Samaritans had female priestesses. This is super recent study. So the question with John 4 that's coming up, could this woman be a Samaritan priest? And we're seeing Jesus engage in a theological debate. That's fascinating. I love it. I think that's, I haven't read the woman's study, but if her study is sourced well, then that's a really awesome thing to discuss or debate. Typically, the woman is seen as filled with shame, loneliness, and Jesus is there to meet her. But if we see her as a religious leader in a debate, it becomes a comment on reconciliation over theology. At the risk of overburdening the chat, I will stop. I'll be sure to send you the sermon once it's preached. Well, I appreciate your concern for the chat, but feel free to continue to share if you would like. I find it fascinating. Reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat with you more about it too anyhow. But that's all very interesting. I'd be curious, how that then implicates different things, such as, you've had 4 husbands and this 5th person you're with is not your spouse, how that, and how her being out there at noon, which all tends to point to someone who is ostracized from the community, someone who is not a part, has in some way been marginalized by the community, how that is explained through the lens of a priestess. However, that being said, I would love if it was true that she was a priestess and this is actually Jesus speaking to a peer on theology and not being condescending, instead treating it as a connectedness of that. So, sorry, I was again working on the issue of someone ordering on my Target account, but did you respond to Fifth Sunday's question labeled question 1 and question 2? I did, and I got to tell you, Tana, it was probably the best answer I've ever given on any question that's ever been asked. It's a shame you missed it. I nailed it, 100%. 70-yard field goal, easy, set a new record. It was fantastic. In fact, Fifth Sunday private messaged me and just couldn't get enough of my enough of the level of my expertise. All right. So what do you guys think about this on YouTube? How's it going for you? Other than I know Fifth Sunday you're struggling with that 200 character limit. Points 4, she references a Jewish midrash about Jacob's well. She engages Jesus on a pretty substantial theological level, more than we see others do on that level. Yeah, I certainly. The thing is referencing a Jewish midrash would have just been oral tradition at that time. And not to dismiss the significance of that, but oral tradition was very much just a part of culture, right? People would sit at night, every night in a lot of places, and just talk about the stories of their ancestors. And it would be told every single night, over and over again. These stories sitting around a fire, like if you can imagine that picture, sitting around a fire, having these discussions about all the stories of your ancestors. So everyone would have had a depth of knowledge of midrash or oral tradition that far exceeds what we have today, because we're no longer a culture of oral tradition. We're a culture of written tradition. Thank you. I am glad that you understood and you were able to fully get my response. Still playing around the 5 husbands idea, but some are asking, is the 5 husbands actually the 5 books of Moses and the man who is not her husband, her Samaritan worldview? If so, could the man who is not her husband be her Samaritan worldview that's preventing her from recognizing the Jewish man standing in front of her? Yeah, I think that's interesting, Marcus. I think my pushback on that would be that is a very Greek way of reading that, making it an allegory as opposed to it being true, which allegories and Platonism are like huge by the time we get to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, definitely after the 5th century CE, Common Era. So once we start getting into Irenaeus and past Irenaeus into Constantine, then allegory becomes the predominant way of interpreting every passage. In fact, Irenaeus would say that if you interpreted it as being anything other than a spiritual allegory, that you're reading it like a Jew. So again, I would want to kind of know more about the sourcing of this, because the danger that we face is, though that sounds really fascinating, is that by making it allegory, we we kind of minimize or reduce the marginalization of this woman, right? And we don't see it as marginalization and don't see it as compassion from Jesus, and therefore it just becomes a debate. But still extraordinarily fascinating. I would love, please, if you think about it, you can donS@dustchurch.com, or if you have my other email, I would love to see some of that individual's thinking around that. There's a lot about YouTube that you like over Twitch, such as what? I would like to know, Amanda, because I think that's good information for me. I like YouTube more. It's a lot less messy and one less thing to have a subscription to. Would you say the book of John likes its allegories, though? Feels like that's a common tool throughout the Gospels. No, I would argue that making the book of John allegorical is a later Platonistic overlay of the Gospels. John is speaking in a Near Eastern way of telling stories. That a parable and an allegory are very different, right? A creative way of storytelling or telling history is different than an allegory. So the danger of an allegory is that an allegory will dismiss the reality of the situation in order to say that there's only a spiritual piece to it. So, for instance, like if you're talking about the corners of the field, if you were to read that allegorically, then we might read that as a person, we are called to leave pieces of ourself for the world to consume, so that way we get rid of all of that stuff so we can encounter God in a more insignificant way, right? I just made that up. But the danger of an allegory is that nothing is physical. So this really, the leaving the corners of the field was not actually about making sure your neighbors weren't hungry or making sure that your neighbors were fed or your neighbors were cared for. It becomes then instead a spiritual ascent. It's why salvation, as is taught in 99.9% of all churches, has nothing to do with physical safety or freedom from harm, freedom from trauma. Instead, it's all spiritual because there is no physicality to it. Right. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Constantine is the emperor of Rome, becomes Christian. And now all of these physical things of leaving the corners of your field and safety from empire, basically, a lot of the teachings of the Bible. And whether it's Rome, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Babylon, doesn't matter. It's all safety from the oppressor. Right. And Rome doesn't want to say that it's embracing a religion that's about safety from them. And of course, Constantine feels safe. So for Constantine and for all the interpreters around him, they're like, oh, this is about safety from evil. This is about safety from death. This is about safety. This is a spiritual safety. It's not a physical safety. And because of that, we've carried that forward, which is why the church, as I will often say, is more about thoughts and prayers than it is about hands and feet, because we've removed the physicalness of our faith. And I would argue most of that elimination of the physicalness of our faith comes from reading the Bible allegorically. So that's just my pushback on what this person is arguing for the woman at the well. I still think it's super fascinating, and I would love to read her research and her sourcing, because I think it's a wonderful premise and concept, and I would love to think more about it. That's kind of like maybe the trepidation I walk into that space with is what's at risk if the woman at the well is all the conversation happening there, the prior husbands, is just an allegory of faith as opposed to a marginalization of barren women in ancient times. I can see the full chat history when I log in, less of a delay when watching on our TV. YouTube is more accessible to more people. Lots of folks are already familiar with it. And I can share it with more confidence that more friends might see it. Yeah, I agree. I find all those things to be very compelling too. I'm glad to hear that there's less of a delay putting it on your TV. I just think YouTube has a better job of broadcasting. All right. What other questions do we have? This has been great so far. Thanks, folks. Marcus, thank you for sharing that concept of the woman at the well. I'm so interested in that now. I wanna learn more. Yeah, that's fair. I received that. I get nervous about it too. Allegory can be a pretty easy scapegoat to hide behind. We'll continue workshopping. Yeah, I mean, even if you become somewhat compelled, I still think it's worth thinking about, right? Like, even if I were to ultimately reject it, it's, you could think of it as an allegorical midrash if you wanted, right? I found Twitch confusing too, which I assume because I'm one of the olds. Yes. I mean, not yes that you're one of the olds. I mean, I concur. Although I did not find Twitch to be all that. Look at that. Another like. Thank you, whoever liked. May you experience tenfold likes on all of your stuff. Oh, that was Sarah. Nice. Sarah, the fact that you persevered and you did not give up on your journey towards liking the video, it means the world to me. Thank you for your perseverance. Clearly the world is bent towards likeness. So thank you for that. The story's pretty cool to read it in the assumption she's a pretty. Yeah, I imagine it is. It's very, very fascinating. I'm one of the youngs, and I found Twitch to be. You're not young. Look, Fifth Sunday. I hate to break this to you. Yes, you are younger than me, but not by such a margin. Not by such a margin. Okay. Yes, I see that. Like, Jesus sees that. Like, yes, Jesus definitely does. All right. Well, this is all information on how to hit the like button. I'm grateful. Believe me, it's such an interesting thing. This whole process of learning social media, learning all the different tools that are available to communicate for creators and everything. It's been really, really fascinating to learn. Oh, there's another like. I'm guessing that's you, Amanda. Amanda, was that your like? I felt it. I experienced it here just now. It's really fascinating to me to learn how some of the algorithms work for sharing, like comments on videos, likes or dislikes are just as impactful. Positive or negative comments are just as impactful, but it's the engagement with the audience that actually moves it up in the algorithm to then get it shared amongst more people. Which makes sense because a place like YouTube, for instance, really wants the engagement of an audience to be people who are clicking on things, people who are sticking around, people who are liking and subscribing, because that keeps them on. That keeps them on the service. Hospice has de-aged me. Fair enough. Don the Shade Thrower. Yes, that's my middle name, actually. People think it's Marvin, but it is not. It's Don the Shade Thrower Sheaver. It just kind of rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? Paul, you've got to have some more questions. What do you got going on? And where'd Ray go? Did Ray leave? Did he just show up for a few moments and then bounce? He's probably watching football. Let's be honest. I still think if Ray's on, I need to get down and see the Memphis Cavs game. Definitely. Jezerick. Whoa, look at you. I don't think that's how the name is pronounced. Yes. And I think I know where you're going with this, Jezrick. This is a family show. Remember that. Jezrick, did you like the video? Did you like the stream? Because if you didn't, we could really use that like, and I don't know what's holding you back from experiencing the fullness of your expression. He's trying to find the like button. I know, right? I realize I'm at a new stage in life where where I'm trying to convince people to like me and like my like my social media. What a fun place in life. Shiver Shade Thrower. I feel like that's like a Game of Thrones name, right, Amanda? I mean, that's totally a Game of Thrones name. Shiver Shade Thrower. Like, I mean, I'm not exactly an intimidating figure, so I don't know how long I last on the Game of Thrones. I'd be one of the quick deaths, I think. But at least I would hope it would at least be glorious. Do we need to roll or spin the wheel? Is that what we need to do? Let me see here. Let me see. I'm going to go ahead and spin the wheel. Oh, real quick. Monday night. I don't know if you saw on social media, but I was on a podcast with a friend of mine, Dave Capozzi. His podcast is called Dig New Streams. Awesome podcast. Really love Dave. He's been someone who's been dear to me for many years. He is someone who left evangelicalism, has left Christianity. Would say that he is agnostic. Anyhow, he is going to be joining me Monday night on the stream. So Dave is going to be live with me on Monday night. So make sure you show up, ask some questions. He's just such a dear human being and so smart, has such great, thoughtful ideas and answers to things. And then if everything goes accordingly, I believe, is it November 17th, Tana? I believe it's November 17th. Yes, 2 Thursdays from now. If everything goes accordingly, David Gushy is going to be live on the live stream. So we're going to have David Gushy, who is the author of many books, a book on Christian ethics. He's written a couple books about inclusion, LGBTQ inclusion in Christianity. He most recently wrote a book called After Evangelicalism, and he's going to be on the live stream in 2 weeks, 2 Thursdays from now. So please make sure you put that in your calendar. I would love to get a nice size audience for him for that, to make sure that we're getting the opportunity to ask him some questions. And you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions live of this guy. And how cool is that? I mean, I'm always so blown away having the opportunity to be able to have conversations with some of these folks. And that's one of the things I've expressed to many of these scholars and teachers I've had the opportunity to interact with, is that a lot of people just don't have the opportunity to ask questions of some of our big thinkers in faith. And we're left to only read the book and then ask others questions that also have read the book. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of get to ask him some questions. So Monday is Dave Capozzi, and then in 2 Thursdays, November 17th is David Gushy. So I put his name in the chat. Definitely check out some of his stuff. Maybe watch some of his things. I was fortunate enough to be on a podcast. I was a guest co-host on a podcast that interviewed him. And I believe you should be able to find that podcast through our social media stuff. If not, reach out to us and we can point you towards that. But yeah, David Gushy. We're having all the Davids. So, all right. I think I see a question. Fifth Sunday. Should a denomination church split if there is an irreconcilable difference on an issue? Should the denomination church stay whole despite the difference? Or is there a better way to handle it? There is a better way to handle it. And the better way to handle it is to get rid of doctrines. Church is split over doctrines. Doctrines are core beliefs that are a line in the sand. If you don't believe this one thing, then you are not a part of our community, is what it says. So, like, if you do not believe in wearing really sweet bicycle hats, this one's reflective, by the way, then you are not a part of my community. And if that is a stated rule, then that is a doctrine that separates people. And this is a problem. And denominations have used doctrines to divide and separate people thousands and thousands of times. And because of that, it becomes extremely complicated, which is why, here's what I'm going to tell you. This is why I believe evangelicalism became so popular, because evangelicalism built a tent that spread out over a bunch of denominations and said there's enough room under this tent for everyone to be here, regardless of some of your held doctrinal views. So within evangelicalism, you have denominations who don't believe women can be teachers or pastors. You have denominations that don't believe in the inclusion of LGBTQ individuals. You have denominations who are racist. And because of that broadness and that allowance of so many different wonderful, clearly beautiful things, I say in jest, it has accepted a lot of people under, and that made evangelicalism attractive. So all of these denominations, all these churches started identifying as evangelical because they wanted to be more interconnected with other people of faith, unlike denominations that kept splitting and splitting. The problem was someone smart and devious decided, wow, if I could be in charge of that tent, I'd be really powerful. And so individuals started speaking for evangelicalism. And as they were not pushed away, and by the way, this is one of David Gushie's expertise. So this would be a wonderful question to ask Gushie in a couple weeks, because David Gushie talks at length about evangelicalism and how it came into power, came into influence, and what its influence still is. So to your question, Fifth Sunday, is this idea that there is better ways. And one of the ways is we need to eliminate doctrine. Doctrine is a problem because doctrine are the fence slats that tell people whether they're in or out. And Christianity comes out of a religion, Judaism, that has no doctrine. Doctrine is a concept added into this faith by non-Jewish leaders. And it is the doctrine that separates. So if we eliminate doctrine, so what's fascinating to me is that the denomination I was a part of, the Evangelical Covenant Church, is considered a non-doctrinal denomination. Instead, they had what's called affirmations. We affirm these things, but everybody expresses them different. We affirm that Jesus is God. Jesus is the Son of God. But some people might say he's God incarnate. Some people might say he's not. Some people might say that whatever, right? So, but what it said was just affirmations. We affirm Jesus is the Son of God. We affirm that the Bible is the Word of God, but they don't go on to say whether it's perfect, whether it's to be taken literal or how to interpret it. And so instead they were affirmations. And that affirmations gives a lot of breadth then to participating, which is one of the things I found very attractive about the ECC. Unfortunately, what they did was decided to draw a line about inclusion. And the moment they drew the line about inclusion, that's when I was separated from the denomination. Many of my colleagues were separated from the denomination because the moment they made a doctrinal statement, even though they refused to say it's a doctrinal statement, but it is, the moment they did that, it forced a division. So to me, the problem isn't different views, different ideas about God, different ideas about faith, different ideas about how to express faith. The problem is when we draw a line in the sand that we call doctrines. I'll try to be on my best behavior despite my book envy. We all will have book envy around David Gushee. We could add up all the books by all the people in our chat and in our community and in all of our relationships, and they would not equal probably the number of books that David Gushee has written. What if getting rid of doctrine is the issues that's creating the tension in the denomination or church? Can you clarify that a little bit? Like, are you saying that the idea of getting rid of doctrines, like the doctrine of we believe that a marriage is between a man and a woman, eliminating that is the thing that causes a split? If that's what you're saying, then my argument for that would be, because even if it's taken out of writing, doesn't matter. It's what people believe. The doctrine has been set in the hearts of people. And once the doctrine is set in the hearts of people, it doesn't matter if it's written down or not any longer, because it'll still be the thing that divides people. People will take their ball and go home. But if they enter into a space that they recognize there aren't rules and limitations, or there aren't doctrines, there aren't lines in the sand when they go into that space, then when someone walks into the space that doesn't abide by some of their own expectations, it won't be as perilous or feel as perilous to them. So I hope that makes sense. Feel free to throw it in the chat if you have something further to ask. We're down to our last few minutes, and we did not spin the wheel of wisdom, and I am so thrilled about that. I still can. I don't want to, but we still can. How's everyone feeling? Everyone enjoying us being on YouTube? I know I got feedback from Amanda and Craig and Tana. I really appreciate that feedback. We want to make sure that this is a space in which people are much more easily able to access it, interact, and participate. So I feel like that is something that YouTube does better than Twitch. Let's see. All right, fifth Sunday. Eliminating doctrine would be the first step in avoiding a split, but what if that first step is what's creating the split? Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, since doctrine is already established, it's kind of like it's hard to take back something you've already said. It's hard. So churches now, denominations, like the Methodist Church, I think, is facing this. The Presbyterian Church has faced this. A lot of mainline churches have faced this idea of eliminating their doctrine or restating their doctrine from excluding LGBTQ individuals, but instead allowing them to participate to their fullest level in the church. And even though the doctrinal statement has changed, there are people that showed up in that space because of that doctrinal statement and are there because they believed that they could go there and know that that was always going to be a held truth. But I think that eliminating a doctrinal statement and that causing the split, I'm okay with that. Because it's only a one-time split. The split will happen then, and then people will either come back or people will go find something else. But it's only a one-time split. But the more we have doctrines, the more that it'll just continue to split and split and split and split. Got to go. Have a good night. Hey, you too, Paul. I wish I could more easily change my name on. Yeah, unfortunately, with it being connected to Google and everything, it makes it a little bit complicated. So, all right. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have a good night. And we might kind of head out of here soon too if folks don't have anything else. Any last minute questions or thoughts? This was great. Thank you guys for making this a really easy night for me. It was funny. I was telling my son before the stream, I was feeling about as nervous about this stream tonight as I was my first stream on Twitch. And I think it was just kind of not quite sure what to expect, not sure how the chat would work, if it would work the same way. As you can see, it's a little bit different when I put it up, but all of that was way easier and simpler. And a lot of that is thanks to you guys. Really appreciate all the questions, appreciate all the conversations and the kindness and stuff that you guys just have all the time in the chat. Just wonderful. So let's see here. RGG was the start. He was, or they were. I don't know if it was a he or not. They were. And honestly, I really hope they come back. And I think that they would add a huge amount of value. And that's something I want to encourage each of you, if you are inviting people to be a part of this stream. This isn't a stream just for those of us of faith. I believe that this is also a stream that that welcomes dissenting voices against faith. Because I don't know about you, but I've often wished that I could sit down and ask some pretty honest questions of people that disagree with me politically, and do it in a safe environment in which I got kind and meaningful responses from them. And my hope is that this stream, this live stream, can be that exact thing. It can be a space in which people of faith, people not of faith, can have conversations about the world, about life, that isn't combative, but instead is mutually respectful, appreciated, and celebrated. So please, if you know people who are non-theists, anti-theists, but are interested in having meaningful conversations about people of faith and about the Bible, because a lot of times people just don't have access to ask. In the same way I was saying earlier, people don't have access to scholars like David Gushee. So I'm excited that we're going to provide something like that to the world. I also think people don't have access to ask the questions that they want to ask of people of faith, or be able to ask people that have left the faith. And so Monday night, you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions of my friend Dave as someone who's left the faith, who deconstructed their faith and decided that reconstructing it was not something they were interested in. And so I hope that you bring those questions to the table on Monday. And let me get caught up here. Oh, you guys are just figuring out tagging people, I see. Yeah, I know nothing about tagging on YouTube, but I will do some homework and see if I can find something out. So that way maybe we can be able to tag people a little bit easier and interact with folks more. All right, folks. Well, I had an absolutely wonderful time with you guys tonight. I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday. And don't forget, Monday, Dave Capozzi from Dig New Streams is going to be on. And I am super, super excited to have him here. And I think it's going to be a blast. So I hope I see you guys Monday. All right. Have a great weekend. And I'll see you soon.